A view of part of the town of Boston in New England, and British ships of war landing their troops. To the Earl of Hillsborough. I can't read that very well, so I'll just put it on there for a second. To the Earl of Hillsborough. Yeah, I don't know what it's saying. So, I'll just... What I should do is I should figure out what these things are saying, right? And just say them. I can't read it very well. This, peacekeepers. I'm gonna read the parts so that I can read real well, though. Patriot Paul Revere witnessed the arrival of British troops at Boston. They were instructed to quell unrest and restore order in 1768. Revere later described how they formed and marched with insolent parade, drums beating, fifes playing, and color flying. Peacekeepers. Patriot Paul Revere witnessed the arrival of British troops at Boston. They were instructed to quell unrest and restore order in 1768. Revere later described how they formed and marched with insolent parade, drums beating, fifes playing, and colors flying. Britain needed to raise funds and believed greater control over its American colonies to be part of the solution. Organized resistance. The introduction of the Stamp Act in 1765 to raise funds in the 13 colonies outraged the colonists. Some took to the streets to protest, and a Stamp Act Congress met in New York to discuss the matter. In July 1765, George III replaced George Grenville with a new prime minister, the Marquis of Rockingham, who repealed both the Stamp and Sugar Acts. Commemorative Teapot of 1766. Boston erupts. Britain's effort to tax the colonies hit the colonists hard. Little heed was paid to their growing. Little heed was paid to their growing sense of identity, and British enforcement was heavy-handed. Resentment grew particularly in Boston, which was becoming a power keg of opposition to colorful rule. Although Britain repealed the troublesome Stamp and Sugar Acts, Parliament still asserted its right to tax the colonists. It passed a declaratory act in March 1766, stating that Parliament had full power and authority to make laws and statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the colonies and people of America. In all cases whatsoever, the act directly opposed the freedoms espoused by the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. Written by the Stamp Act Congress, which stated that all resolution, votes, orders, and proceeding whereby the power and authority of the Parliament of Great Britain to make laws and statutes is denied, are hereby declared to utterly null and void. Despised duties. Many in Parliament believed that the repeal of the many in Parliament believed that the repeal of the Stamp Act had been too conciliatory toward the colonists. Many in Parliament believed that the repeal of the Stamp Act had been too conciliatory toward the colonists. After the Marquis of Rockingham's ministry fell in July 1766, William Pitt, an elder recently made Earl of Chatham, became leader of coalition government. Pitt delegated the matter of taxing the American colonies to Charles Townshend, his chancellor of the Exchequer. Townshend proposed 4 new acts of Parliament passed in June 1767. The first of the 4 Townshend Acts, as they became known, shut down the New York Assembly for refusing to execute the governor's instruction in house British troops. As required by the Quartering Act of 1765, the colony had instead paid $3,552 today towards the soldiers' upkeep. The other Townshend Act taxed lead, glass, paints, paper, and tea, and were met with slow burning fury among the American colonists. Colonial outcry was multifaceted. In December 1767, the first of John Dickinson's letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania was published. This was one in a series of 12 essays by the Philadelphia lawyer, later a member of the First Continental Congress, criticizing the Townshend Acts. The letters, which were widely circulated and reprinted, played a vital role in timing colonial opinion against the legislation and prompted the Massachusetts House of Representatives to take up the case. Samuel Adams, Massachusetts, circular letter passed by the colony's House of Representatives in 1768 and sent to the other 12 colonies, argued that the Townshend duties were not just bad but unconstitutional. The letter infuriated the British, and when Massachusetts refused to revoke it, the Assembly was dismissed as these officials' responses to the Act's attention. So did reactions of everyday colonists. Citizens gathered, assemblies met, and merchants agreed to stop importing British goods. Likewise, many colonists ceased purchasing taxed items and instead made their own paper, spun their own cloth, but the response to the duties was not just economic. Some colonists turned to violence against the officials enforcing the duties, while the Sons of Liberty, a secret society formed to fight taxation, erected liberty poles as symbols of their dismay. Uneasy occupation. Townshend established a board of custom commissioners for America with incentive to convict violators. He intended to use some of the funds raised to pay the salaries of the colonial governors, previously the responsibility of the colonial assemblies. Another British reorganization in 1768 created Another British reorganization in 1768 created a new ministerial position. Secretary of State for the colonies until then. Secretary of State. Another British reorganization in 1768 created a new ministerial position. Secretary of State for the colonies until then. The colonies, along with southern England, Wales, and Ireland had fallen under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of State for the Southern Department. Now one minister, the Earl of Hillsborough, appointed in February 1768, could concentrate on Britain's colonies alone. His first task was to do something about the unrest brewing in Boston. Tackling Boston, Hillsborough instructed the British commander-in-chief in America, Major General Thomas Gage, to leave his headquarters in New York City and go to Boston to take command. Gage immediately sent 4,000 troops to Boston, but when the regiments arrived in the city's harbor, officials announced that there were no facilities available to house them, leaving the redcoats to camp on commons and in public buildings. This set scene for serious friction between the inhabitants of Boston and the British troops. In addition, in the first few months after the redcoats' arrival, Gage lost as many as 70 soldiers to desertion, as men slipped away from the army and into the civilian population. Private Richard Ames was executed on Boston. Liberty Pole, a tall wooden staff mounted with a Phrygian cap. Liberty Pole, a tall wooden staff mounted with a Phrygian cap. Liberty poles were both meeting places and symbols of dissent. Private Richard Ames was executed on Boston Common to set an example against desertion in October 1768. Tension in Boston were likely exacerbated by those in New York, where the Sons of Liberty had published a pamphlet to the betrayed inhabitants of the city, leading to clashes in the streets between colonists and soldiers. In July 1770, the British cut down a New York Liberty pole in a deliberate act of provocation, the fifth such pole to fall at the hands of British. Massacre victim Crispus Attucks. Born around 1723 to a slave father and Native American mother, Crispus Attucks was raised in Framingham, Massachusetts, sold to Deacon William Brown at 16. Attucks ran away on September 30th, 1750. 3 notices about escape were posted in the Boston Gazette offering a £10, $2,250 today reward, to no avail. Attucks became Michael Johnson, working on Boston as a seaman and rope maker for about 20 years. On March 5th, 1770, he responded to calls to demonstrate against British troops. He was felled by 2 musket balls, making him the first casualty of War of Independence. Don't let your minds get perverted, just take it professionally, because that is what I'm doing. I'm not trying to massacre people, I'm just trying to say, don't twist the words by saying they are something that they are not. It is not a perversion. This is real history. He is a real massacre victim, and it is not funny. In January 1770, the British cut down a New York Liberty pole in a deliberate act of provocation, the 5th such pole to fall at the hands of British soldiers. This action sparked the Battle of Golden Hill outside New York City on January 19, 1770. It was more a brawl than a battle. No one was killed in the clash, but further disorder on the streets followed. Rising tempers and fraying nerves added to the underlying tension. Boiling point. Boston had an uneasy winter. While multiple factions debated the Townshend Acts, civilians and soldiers shared mutual antipathy. The Journal of Occurrences, a series of new accounts, reported many offenses made by soldiers against citizens. Although tales of rapes and beatings were highly exaggerated, they nonetheless fueled the colonists' anger. Boston then witnessed two major incidents that stirred the cauldron of resentment. First, in February 1770, a young boy named Christopher Cedar was killed by a customs official. The Boston Gazette made his death and his funeral. No. The Boston Gazette made much of his death, and his funeral was impressively attended. The second incident occurred on the night of March 5th, when the British were unprepared for action, having transferred 2 regiments, half of the infantry strength, to Halifax in Canada. Popular anger boiled over when British sentry became embroiled with a civilian who had insulted an officer. A small squad under Captain Thomas Preston went to the sentry rescue. A menacing crowd soon gathered and pelted the soldiers with whatever they could lay their hands on. In the chaos, one soldier was hit by ice, then slipped. As he recovered, he fired his firelock, and other shot rang out to answer. 5 civilians, starting with Crispus Attucks, were killed, and 6 were wounded. Boston, on the brink of anarchy, arriving on the scene, Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson restored calm. Preston and his soldiers were jailed and later stood trial for murder. Represented by patriots John Adams and Josiah Quincy, the case resulted in acquittals and 2 minor sentences. But the so-called Boston Massacre was not forgotten. 5 civilians had died at the hands of His Majesty's troops. The damage of the British the damage to the British cause had been done. Hours to the gates of this city, many thousands of our brave brethren in the country, deeply affected with our distress, and to whom we are greatly obliged on this Osophian, no one knows where this would have ended, and what important consequences, even to the whole British Empire, might have followed. No one knows where this would have ended, and what important consequences, even to the whole British Empire, might have followed, which our moderation and loyalty upon trying an occasion of Cafin, and our faith in the commander afferences have happily prevented. Last Thursday, agreeable to a general request of the inhabitants, and by the consent of parents and friends, were carried to their grave in succession the bodies of Samuel Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, and Crispus Attucks, the unhappy victims who fell in the bloody massacre of Monday evening preceding. On this occasion, most of the shops in town were shut. All the bells were ordered to toll on solemn peal, as were also those in neighboring towns of Charleston, Roxbury, and the procession began to move between the hours of 4 and 5 in the afternoon. 2 of unfortunate sufferers, viz. James Caldwell and Crispus Attucks, who were strangers, born from Faneuil Hall. Okay, I'm trying to sound the words out. I didn't say Crip. Okay, don't take that as what I said. Inflammatory account. The obituary of Samuel Grays, Samuel Maverick James, Caldwell, and Crispus Attucks, 4 of 5 men killed by British troops in Boston Massacre, were published in the Boston Gazette on March 12, 1770, fanning the flames of outrage. The events in Boston helped to stake anti-British sentiment throughout the colonies. Meanwhile, the unpopular Townshend Acts failed to resolve the dispute over taxation. British politicians were stupefied by a colonial reaction to the Townshend Acts, the Assembly's petitions and resolutions, the large-scale intimidation, and increased political violence. Eventually, another new British ministry under Lord North repealed the Acts of April 12, 1770, but retained the tax on tea. Troubled City. The Boston Massacre was not the end of the unrest in Boston. The Boston Tea Party of 1773 set the stage for the entire War of Independence and led to the punitive, intolerable acts which sparked further dissent. The first battles of the War of Independence were fought in the area around Boston, at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, and at Bunker Hill a few months later. Ooh, this is a big event. The Boston Massacre. I remember this in school. The Boston Massacre. Enmity between the people of Boston and occupying soldiers peaked in March 1770 when a mob attacked British sentry. Captain Thomas Preston men arriving on the scene fired at the jeered crowd. These people were killed instantly. 2 died later from wounds. Inflaming anti-British sentiment that October, thanks to evidence of eyewitnesses such as Apocryphy, Richard Palms, Preston, and his men were put on trial. 2 were found guilty of manslaughter. I immediately went there and saw Captain Preston at the head of 6 or 8 soldiers with guns breast high and bayonets fixed. Then instantly I saw a piece of snow or ice fall among the soldiers, on which the soldier at the officer's right hand stepped back and discharged his gun. At the space of some second the soldier at his left fired next, and the others one after the other. After the first gun was fired, I heard the word fire, but who said it I know not. Turning myself to the left, I saw one man dead, distant about 6 feet. I, having a stick in my hand, made a stroke at the soldier, who fired and struck the gun out of his hand. I then made a stroke at his officer. My right foot slipped. This brought me on my knee, and falling short, I saw the soldier that fired the first gun endeavoring to push me through with his bayonet, on which I threw my stick at his head. The soldier, starting back, gave me an opportunity to jump from him into Exchange Lane, or I must have been inevitably run through my body. I looked back and saw 3 persons laying on the ground, and perceiving a soldier stepping round the corner as I thought to shoot me, I ran down Exchange Lane. I looked back and saw 3 persons laying on the ground, and perceiving a soldier stepping round the corner as I thought to shoot me, I ran down Exchange Lane, and followed Mr. Gridley with several other persons with the body of Captain Morton's apprentice up to the prison house, and saw he had ball shot through his breast. In my return I found that the officers and soldiers were gone. That's terrible. Samuel Adams. I just like looking at the pictures before I go through it. Right now I'm telling a story of history. Later I'll be making history. Or is this making history? I don't want it erased, so... Boston radical Samuel Adams, patriot activist born 1722, died in 1803. From resistance to rebellion before 1775. All might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. I didn't make this history. There's the face of the man who made the history. We recorded it, and we're pushing it out. Boston radical Samuel Adams was the leading theoretician and activist in the early stages of the War of Independence. An admiring Thomas Jefferson once called him the patriarch of liberty. Modern historians have queried whether Sam Adams was really, as was once believed, the hidden hand behind major events. Such as the riots that led to the Boston Massacre in 1770 or the Boston Tea Party in 1774. None, however, have denied the impact of his polemical writings or his efforts to invent new forms of political resistance. Puritan values. Adams was born the son of a prosperous Boston merchant who was also deacon in the Congregationalist Church and a significant figure in the city's political life. Sam Adams inherited from his father a firm belief in the Puritan virtues of honesty and austerity, and critical attitude towards British royal officials. In 1739, Deacon Adams was involved in a land speculation project that failed through the actions of the Massachusetts royal governor and the British Parliament. Financially disastrous for the Adams family. The fiasco added a personal bitterness to their distrust of Britain and its agents. Making a stand. The statue of Adams outside Boston Faneuil Hall shows him standing resolute with folded arms as he supposedly stood after demanding the withdrawal of British troops from the city in 1770. Sam Adams followed in his father's footsteps by entering the Boston Caucus, a radical political club with considerable influence in the city. I just want to say something real quick that's just totally random right now. If somebody was to try to mess with my camera on my phone and mess it up or whatever, don't worry about it. I'm reading straight from the page. A radical political club with considerable influence in the city, not having his father aptitude for business. However, he proved barely capable of earning a living. All his energy was devoted to public issues. His cousin John Adams, future second president of the United States, once wrote of Sam that he was perhaps too attentive to the public and not enough so to himself and his family. Money problems were a permanent feature of his life. Until the 1760s, Sam Adams was known only in the world of politically disaffected Bostonians. Until 1760s, Sam Adams was known only in the world by politically disaffected Bostonians. It was a dispute over British taxation following the Sugar Act of 1764 that brought him to wider notice when the Boston town meeting, the city's assembly asked him to write instructions for its representatives to the Massachusetts Assembly. These contained a statement of the principle of no taxation without representation. The following year he was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Forming a united front between 1765 and 1774, Adams was tireless in organization resistance to measures that he regarded as offenses to the colonists' rights and freedoms. A gifted propagandist, he wrote articles in opposition to British rule in Massachusetts. In his political texts, he formulated a principled justification of rebellion, minting phrases that were later used by Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Adams advocated novel tactics of resistance, such as trade boycotts, and grasped the need for the colonies to unite. His ideas of sending a circular letter from the Massachusetts Assembly to other colonies in 1768 drew a His idea of sending a circular letter from the Massachusetts Assembly to other colonies in 1768 drew a repressive response from the British authorities. With even sharper subversive intent, his Committee of Correspondence set up in 1772 established communication between radicals in the different colonies. The British authorities denounced Adams as a rabble-rouser who used mob violence for political ends. I try my best not to mess up the words. Every now and then I might say something. I try to correct myself. I didn't say communion. You know the word that I said. In 1765, they accused him of inciting Boston mobs to attack the home of Governor Thomas Hutchinson, and in 1770 they detected his hand behind the disorders that led to the Boston massacre of civilians by British soldiers. In both cases, Adams defended the rioters in print, but denied incitement. Whatever the truth, it is hard to believe he was not involved in organizing the Boston Tea Party in December 1773. When a shipment of tea was dumped into Boston Harbor following his address in the Boston town meeting, whatever the truth, it is hard to believe he was not involved in organizing the Boston Tea Party in December 1773. When a shipment of tea was dumped into the Boston Harbor following his address to the Boston town meeting. Although it is no longer believed that his closing words, "This meeting can do nothing further to save the country," was a signal to attack the ships. He is likely to have known that a plan was afoot to take action. After the Boston Tea Party, Adams led the defiant response to the coercive acts in Massachusetts. He was a prime mover in organizing the Continental Congress in Philadelphia and attended as a delegate. The first time he had traveled outside his own state, it was believed that the British military expedition in Lexington in April 1775 was designed to capture Adams and his colleague John Hancock. Forewarned by Paul Revere, the pair escaped. The incident enhanced Adams' reputation. When his cousin John Adams went to France in 1776, the French were disappointed that he was not the famous Adams. Okay, so if somebody decides to send up a plot to come and get me, and I don't get caught, then I get more famous. After 1775, Sam Adams played a lost prominent role in the War of Independence and the construction of the United States. He was, however, a signatory of the Declaration of Independence and did solid work in congressional committees in 1779. He helped draft a constitution for Massachusetts. He advocated a minimal central government for the United States, but supported adopting the Constitution despite his rebellious past. He backed the use of force to suppress uprisings against the Republic. The chief concern of his later years was spread of corruption, which ran counter to the austere virtue that he exemplified in his own life. So, there he is. Samuel Adams. Defender of rights, Samuel Adams points at the Massachusetts Charter, a document he argued protected the rights of the colony citizens against abuse of royal power. The portrait was made by John Copley around 1772. Making a stand, the statue of Adams outside Boston Faneuil Hall shows him standing resolute with folded arms. Okay. The statue of Adams outside Boston Faneuil Hall shows him standing resolute with folded arms as he supposedly stood after demanding the withdrawal of British troops from the city in 1770. It is a good maxim in politics to put and keep the enemy in the wrong. Yeah, like for an example, current times, North Korea is wrong. Don't be thinking that I'm saying he's good. He's not. Do not think that North Korea is good. Period. They are not good. I am saying this. This is not out of the book. I am saying this on my own because I'm a revolutionary. Okay, so I record all the text so you know what's mine and what's theirs. 1722, born September 27 in Boston, Massachusetts, the son of merchant Samuel Adams and Mary Highfield Adams. Okay, I'll say it again. Timeline. 1722. Born September 27 in Boston, Massachusetts, the son of merchant Samuel Adams and Mary Fifield Adams. 1736. Enters Harvard College for his master's degree in 1743. He defends the thesis that it can be lawful to resist our country's ruler. I believe that is an idea that brought into play the balance of powers, the three different branches. 1748 launches the Independent Advertiser, a weekly newspaper. 1749 marries Elizabeth Checkley. She bears 5 children, 2 of whom survive infancy before her death in 1757. 1756 to 64 serves as Boston tax collector. 1764 marries Elizabeth Well. Opposing the Sugar Act, he writes an attack on taxation without representation. So he's a tax collector, but he doesn't like it without representation. August 1765, accused by fomenting riots against the Stamp Act in Boston. I'm not looking at the phone, I just want you guys to know that. September 1765, elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. 1768, writes the Massachusetts circular letter sent to the assemblies of their colonies. March 1770, demands that British troops leave Boston after the Boston Massacre. November 1772, creates the Boston Committees of Correspondence to communicate with radicals in their colonies. December 16, 1773, organizes a protest meeting in Boston against the Tea Act, which results in Boston Tea Party. May 1774, leads to the Boston town meeting in calling for an economic boycott of British trade. June 1774, sent as delegate to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. June 1774, sent as delegate to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. These are positives, so if you say them twice, they're still positives. April 19th, 1775, with John Hancock, flees Lexington to evade capture by British troops. May 1775, attends the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. July 4th, 1776, signs the U.S. Declaration of Independence. 1779 helps draft the Massachusetts Constitution adopted the following year. 1779 helps draft the Massachusetts Constitution adopted the following year. 1781 retires from the Continental Congress to concentrate on state politics in Boston. 1786 support suppression of Shav's rebellion. 1789 to 93 serves as lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. (1781) retires from the Continental Congress to concentrate on state politics to Boston. 1786 supports suppression of Shays' Rebellion. 1789 to 93 serves as lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. 1793 to 97 serves as governor of Massachusetts before retiring from politics. 1803 dies on October 2nd and is buried. Okay, let me repeat that. 1803 dies on October 2nd and is buried in Boston's Granary Burying Ground. I kind of said it for a second and I didn't want to say that. So I want to say something though. I'm unedited and uncut. I put all the words. So, if they want to go through the words just to see if I said what is right, that's called testing the spirits, right? So, you guys thought I was going to spend a lot of time editing. Well, no, what's going to happen is you're going to spend a lot of time studying it if you want to say anything against me. Jesus Christ of Nazareth is my Savior, and he appointed Samuel Adams in the spot that he was in.